Hello, Gooners. That was a little much. It's time we had a chat, because everything lately is being ruined by what can essentially be boiled down to corporate greed. Of course, corporations have always been pretty greedy, but these days it seems like they've taken it up a notch, with quarter-over-quarter profit growth becoming a mandate in nearly every sector. It's no longer enough for a company to simply make money, even lots of it. No, now it's a requirement for many businesses to make more profit every few months than they did the previous quarter. And it's one thing to make money or value profits, but lately, many of these businesses have valued these goals to such an extreme extent that they're willing to compromise the product, service, and customer service experience to achieve that result. And when it comes to entertainment and consumer electronics, there are perhaps no two better examples than Disney and Nintendo, but more on them in a minute. First, to continue watching this video, please click the I agree button shown here. No need to read all of the tiny text, it's just a binding legal agreement that says that before you consume this piece of content, you agree not to watch any videos on YouTube other than Wendigoon and Wendigang, on occasion Creepcast, that even if my video causes you significant harm, like say, if I read a bunch of your personal information out loud to millions of people, you can't sue me, and that I can freely take your data and sell it to anyone I want. And no, I don't have to tell you I'm doing that. Obviously, aside from a few of you freaks, none of you would hit that button. Also, if you just tap the screen if you're on your phone, it pauses the video, so, don't do that either. What I just described wasn't too far off from EULAs, or end-user license agreements, that pretty much any software and many hardware products make you agree to before you can use them. This is a contract between the company and the eventual user of the product, specifying the terms and conditions of use. EULAs are forms of adhesion contracts, which is a contract provided by one party with considerable bargaining strength, presented to consumers of goods and services who have little to no ability to negotiate the terms of the deal. Think things like mortgages, insurance, leases, airplane tickets, and baggage fees. If you ever tried negotiating the terms of these agreements with, say, American Airlines about changing the language of their contracts before you buy a plane ticket, you were probably met with laughter and the sound of them hanging up the phone. Which my concerns were valid. I don't know why they did that. Many of these products and services are almost essential to modern life. iPhones and apps like Google Maps, renting a car or taking an Uber, and even watching TV shows and movies. Holding these necessities hostage until you agree to give up personal rights and privileges isn't something people should have to sacrifice, and yet many of us do, often without realizing it. Which brings us back to Disney and Nintendo. Now, these are just two examples out of many examples of companies trying to enforce predatory agreements and EULAs. I'm not singling them out as the only offenders, but recently, both have been the center of controversy for leveraging their powers in ways that feel borderline abusive. Today, I'm going to dive into these types of agreements and break down the troubling trend amongst some of the biggest corporations, their infringements on consumers' rights, the public backlash they faced, and the occasionally deadly consequences of their actions. Yes, you heard me right, deadly. Let's start with Disney. The Walt Disney Company is known for their timeless classic animated films and theme parks that span the globe. From Anaheim to Paris and many others in between, over decades, Disney has carefully crafted their reputation as a wholesome, family-forward brand, a company practically made from magic. Every year, millions of visitors pass through the gates of Disney parks, of which a single day park pass for a family of 4 costs over $1,000, plus, parking, food, souvenirs, and the hotel stay. On October 3rd, 2023, a woman named Kanokporn Tang Swan, also known as Amy, along with her husband Jeffrey Piccolo and Jeffrey's mother Jackie, dined at the Raglan Road Irish Pub in the downtown Disney Springs area in Orlando, Florida. On the Disney Springs website, Raglan Road proudly promoted itself as a restaurant with several allergen-free options. Amy, a New York area physician, had a very severe dairy and nut allergy, which led the family to choose this specific restaurant. Upon ordering, they checked with the server multiple times to confirm the food would be free of ingredients known to be fatal to Amy. In turn, the server checked with the kitchen who, quote, unequivocally assured them the food would be allergen-free. When the food arrived at the table, it was not marked with the allergen-free flags that typically adorn meals with dietary restrictions. Again, the family checked, and again, the server insisted the food was safe. So Amy, Jackie, and Jeffrey ate like it was just another meal. Unfortunately, this would not be like just another meal. Shortly after the group separated to go shopping in downtown Disney, 45 minutes after the food was consumed, Amy suffered an acute allergic reaction while shopping by herself in Planet Hollywood. Sensing something was wrong, Amy self-administered her EpiPen while a bystander called 911, and she was rushed to a nearby hospital. Her family, who was attempting to contact her, had no idea this was happening to their wife and daughter. They only obtained details of her whereabouts from someone who found her phone. Racing to the medical center, Jeffrey and Jackie were too late. Amy had died from anaphylaxis due to elevated levels of dairy and nuts in her system. As tragic as this already was, it was about to get even worse for the family. That's because on February 22nd, 2024, Jeffrey filed a lawsuit, as you could imagine, against Raglan Road and Walt Disney Parks and Resorts for $50,000 in damages in a trial by jury. Which, $50,000? If I triple check with you that my wife's food doesn't have the thing she's allergic to in it, and you keep telling me it's okay, and then she dies, your great-grandchildren are going to inherit your debt. Well, thankfully, if you've learned anything from these channels, you've learned that corporations are quick to accept responsibility and make amends for any wrongdoing. The suit claimed negligence, as Raglan Road and Disney failed to properly train its staff members to follow its own allergy policies and procedures for food preparation and food service. In response, Disney filed a motion to compel arbitration and stay case on May 31st of 2024. In other words, Disney wanted to stop the court case and force Jeffrey into arbitration. This would potentially prevent a trial by jury, which would also spare Disney from a lot of bad press. Now, forcing a plaintiff into arbitration is extremely difficult in most situations, because arbitration is meant to be voluntary. It doesn't usually benefit an alleged victim to bypass a trial and essentially enter into settlement talks with their offender. However, there is one way in which a party can be forced into arbitration, and that's if they've signed an agreement saying they will, which, given the title of the video you clicked on, you can probably see where this is going. Notice that at no point in the story did I mention the part where, shortly after the family was seated at their table, the waiter came around asking them to sign a multi-page contract agreement before dining, and that's because that doesn't happen. But what does happen is the good old magical Disney lawyers argued that this actually is what happened. Because, get this, Disney argued that way back in November of 2019, Jeffrey had created a Disney Plus account. I'm not kidding. And in creating that account, he had checked the box stating that he agreed to the subscriber agreement and Disney's terms of use. As Disney's lawyers pointed out, the subscriber agreement states that any dispute between you and us, except for small claims, is subject to a class action waiver and must be resolved by individual binding arbitration. The subscriber agreement also states that, quote, when you create a Disney Plus or ESPN Plus account, you also agree to the Walt Disney Company's terms of use. After combing through the unbelievably dense terms of use, the litigation section states the following. Quote, you and Disney DTC agree to arbitrate, as provided below, all disputes between you, including any related disputes involving the Walt Disney Company or its affiliates that are not resolved informally, except disputes relating to the ownership or enforcement of intellectual property rights. So according to them, because he watched TV shows on a streaming service 4 years ago, he can now not take them to a trial after his wife died due to their negligence. I mean this wholeheartedly. This is not a joke or in Minecraft. This is real life, and I mean it. If that ever happened to me, there will be a body count. That'll play crazy in court. Legally, Disney had Jeffrey over a barrel. He did sign that agreement, but in any reasonable person's mind, the agreement is there to stop someone from sharing passwords or committing piracy. And the language is there, but most would assume that it's to prevent people from frivolously suing Disney for ruining their week with a poor live-action adaptation of one of their classic 2D animated films. Which, if you're making a live-action film, but all of the main subjects are CGI, that's not live-action. You've just created a worse-looking animation. Or from filing a class action suit against the company for jacking up the monthly prices on Disney+. And, you know, putting multiple commercial breaks in every movie while charging more for the ad-supported tier than one without ads just a couple years ago. But no rational person signing up for Disney Plus to watch an episode of Gargoyles or the Goofy movie would ever think that doing so would essentially grant a significant legal exception to some random restaurant 5 years later when it kills your wife. Like, could you imagine how devilish the attorneys have to be? Like, a guy's wife died, and they're like, ha ha ha, look who watched the Book of Boba Fett. To really understand what they're trying to do here, it's important to dig further into why it would be so important for a company like Disney to settle a legal dispute by arbitration. With arbitration, a lot of bureaucracy regarding strict legal procedure is eliminated, including the discovery phase in which both sides have to turn over any records related to the dispute. Text, emails, other private communication, or things that a public entity probably wants to keep behind closed doors. Arbitration is also private and often binding, meaning there's far less opportunity to appeal. If, for example, you have the other party caught in a technical legal trap, like the one that Disney has over all its Disney Plus users, you would probably be better served by arbitration. With arbitration, you don't have to factor in issues like leaving your fate in the hands of a jury full of empathetic people, many of whom are probably also Disney Plus subscribers themselves, and also probably don't like the idea that lets the company kill their wife. You don't have to worry about documents found during discovery, making their way to the press, making your company look bad. And best of all, if you win, the plaintiff has no recourse. There's nothing they can do about it. But it was during the weeks leading up to this case that Disney's kryptonite appeared, backing them to a corner and forcing their hand. And that is negative public sentiment. Around August 12th of 2024, news began to spread that Disney was using the legal language behind their digital streaming service as a shield for, once again, and I cannot stress this enough, killing someone's wife. Just about everyone seemed to agree that this was the ultimate scumbag move, and from the magic land of imagination, love, hope, and wonder, no less. The outrage was justified. There are 124.6 million Disney Plus subscribers in the United States, probably all of whom just wanted to watch The Mandalorian without giving up their rights to trial by jury. Gosh, that sentence is insane. I hate that this is where we live. Trial by jury you are giving up if they, once again, murder your wife. This story dominated the news with 120 straight hours of negative press for Disney. The public backlash grew so severe, in fact, that Disney backtracked on their request to move the case to arbitration and released a statement to get back in the good graces of the general public. While this was certainly welcome news to the family of the victims, Disney still proceeded with the court case itself. The matters have been kept tightly under wrap, but from what we could find, no settlement has been reached. For all we know, there hasn't even been an offer. Today, Raglan Road's menu has made a significant change to their website, adding the following disclaimer. Quote, "We are not a gluten/allergen-free restaurant. We cannot guarantee that any dish we prepare is free from gluten/allergen or free from cross-contact. Guests must notify their server of any allergy-friendly request. A manager will then discuss our allergy menu with you. Guests must use their own discretion to make informed choices based on their individual dietary needs." Oh, so the place that advertised themselves as being like allergy-free actually updated to say that. Man, I bet there's one family that it would have been really cool if it said that earlier. But from there, let's move on to the Disney of the gaming world, Nintendo. Imagine walking into a GameStop or Best Buy, swiping your debit card for $600, including a $90 game, and walking out with your brand new Switch 2. That sentence is technically incorrect, because from a legal perspective, according to Nintendo, you don't even own your console. You don't own your games, you don't own your downloads, your game saves, or even the content you make while using their software. And you never did. The moment you opened the box and fired up the device, you entered into a legally binding agreement that significantly restricts what you can and can't do with the console that you paid for. Why? You know why. Their end-user license agreement. Now, to clarify a few things, as mentioned earlier, EULAs are not unique to Nintendo, although for reasons we'll get into, they tend to take the enforcement of these further than most other companies. Or at the very least, the stories of Nintendo taking action seem to surface more publicly than others. PlayStation's terms, for what it's worth, include language like, all rights to use system software are granted by license only. Xbox isn't any better, as they say, the Xbox software is licensed to you, not sold. Secondly, EULAs are not a recent invention either. Consoles and other devices have come with these for decades. But as tech devices become more and more integrated with online services, software license agreements become more critical to the user experience ingrained within these devices. There used to be a time when you bought a game, took it home, played it, beat it, and traded it in at GameStop, for a whole 74 cents. Now games are more and more online, requiring the use of paid services managed by the company who makes the console and some of the games in order to fully enjoy them. But it's also that very connectivity that creates the ethical conundrums. As companies can now access, change, and disable the service on your console, and since those services are becoming so essential, disabling them is like disabling the console itself. And that's one reason Nintendo has found themselves in the news lately. People have had their brand new $600 console bricked, banned, and disabled in various ways, sometimes for violations they didn't even commit. It's a slippery slope towards anti-consumerism, and just because other console makers may have done something similar in the past, that doesn't justify Nintendo from doing the same. In 2017, Nintendo's EULA for the original Switch served as the foundation of an upsetting trend that encroaches on some of the rights of consumers. At the time, it was relatively short, just 2,055 words and 9 sections, but it set a clear tone, especially with the opening statement. Quote, "The software is licensed, not transferred to you." That's Nintendo telling you definitively that you're not actually buying their games, you're renting them under their rules. But it only got worse from there. The license was described as non-exclusive and could be withdrawn at any time. In other words, if Nintendo felt like it, they could end your rights to use their software, with no obligation as to explain why. And when it came to software updates, the EULA stated they could change or delete content on your system without notice. If you had an unauthorized modification, well, your Switch could become completely unusable permanently. Now, your gut reaction might be to say, "But Goon, they wouldn't," which also don't call me that, "they wouldn't actually do that to their customers." And I understand the instinct. Who could imagine that they do it to their customers? But think about Disney. Think about what they tried to do. Again, killing a wife. And probably would have continued doing had there not been such a huge public outcry. I think it's safe to say that if a company can get away with something, they will. Take Apple, for example. Their EULAs have given them tremendous freedom to remove, change, or even add whatever they want to the devices people pay for. In 2014, you might remember the time that they downloaded a new album from U2 onto everyone's iPod. I remember having never heard of U2 in my life, but was really annoyed because anytime I tried to go to music on, I think it was my dad's phone, they were always there, just staring at me. The move was incredibly controversial, with Apple widely mocked for it. And it obviously angered users who weren't warned, didn't opt in, and didn't want their hard drive space taken up by an album they never bought. Apple eventually apologized, but they didn't do anything they weren't allowed to, because the iTunes EULA that people signed when they agreed to the terms of the iTunes Store said that Apple could do exactly that. So all the big tech companies do this, but there's another reason Nintendo's EULAs have made recent news. Sometime in or around November of 2019, as best as we can tell, they never gave it an official date, a brand new Section 7 was added to Nintendo's EULA called Dispute Resolution, Binding Individual Arbitration, Class Action Waiver. Which, if you were paying attention to the Disney thing, you probably see where this is going. Without reading the entirety of the legal verbiage, it says that if you have any dispute with Nintendo about your console, your account, your games, anything, it will not be resolved in court. Full language for this will be provided in the description if anyone's interested. Similar to the Disney Plus controversy, any disagreement with Nintendo goes to arbitration with a third party of Nintendo's choosing. That choice is always the American Arbitration Association. This is your only option. Remember how arbiters are supposed to be impartial? Well, Nintendo is saying pick from the pre-selected list of people we employ regularly. And there's also only one person on the list. A judge can't help you, a jury can't help you, and most importantly, you can't team up with other gamers in a class action lawsuit, pretty much no matter what Nintendo does. Or
Nintendo does.
So what can you do? Well, there is one matter of recourse. Within 30 days of buying your new Switch, you can mail a letter, a physical letter, to Nintendo to opt out of the arbitration, which, if you bought a Switch 2 console on launch day, is already too late to do. A lot of people have been reporting that the arbitration clause was new for the Switch 2, but the truth is that it's been in place for 5 years, although by 2025, the agreement had become a monster. What started as a quaint 9-section long agreement had blossomed into an albatross, featuring 21 sections of conditions that all play increasingly unfavorable for users. According to the updated agreement, Nintendo can revoke your entire license for any reason. That means your digital purchases, your online access, and yes, even certain games can be disabled. The clause is intentionally broad, defining Nintendo account service to include the eShop, online play, parental controls, and anything else that connects to your Nintendo account. And here's what's extra terrible. In the past, you may have been able to get around some of these potential issues by sticking to physical games only. But, new for the Switch 2, many physical games aren't even physical copies. They're merely game keys, empty plastic without the game copy on them. These keys are basically just a code that gives your console permission to play the game when the plastic is inside of the system. You still have to download the game itself from the eShop. I remember being a kid and going to GameStop and buying a game and coming home and then just playing the game. Combined with that, the issue of game servers being taken down, ending support for some games, and the ability to play them down the road, and the state of gaming in 2025 is a bit of a mess. No thanks, of course, to the practices of companies like Nintendo, Apple, Sony, or Microsoft. Alright, so I know I've been picking on Nintendo a bit in this video, but this next part is worth talking about and brings everything full circle, so bear with me. I also just don't like them. In July of 2019, a man named Ryan Diaz filed a class action complaint against Nintendo after his Joy-Con joystick started registering phantom movements. He had bought a Switch and an extra set of controllers, and less than a year later, the left stick was drifting on its own. If you're watching this video, you stay inside. You know what stick drift is. Diaz wasn't alone. This wasn't a one-off, it was a defect. A widely known defect. Reddit threads piled up with users showing their characters walking sideways without input. Reticles wandering off target, games unplayable due to a physical issue inherent to the design of the Joy-Cons. My wife likes to play the Switch a lot, and I know we've had at least 2 Joy-Cons that have had stick drift, which I feel like didn't happen nearly as much back in the days of Xbox or PlayStation. I mean, Xboxes and PlayStation still exist, but back when they were cool. Nintendo didn't respond publicly, but behind the scenes, they were scrambling. Just a few days later, they released the Switch Lite, console with built-in Joy-Cons that couldn't even be replaced. It was added to the lawsuit almost immediately because the same exact defect was showing up there too. And don't worry, since they're attached to the console, you can't get new ones. At this point, there were 2 options for Nintendo. 1. Admit fault and issue a recall for the defective joysticks, winning the respect of the gaming community. You already know they didn't do that one, so 2. Prepare for battle. It was here that Nintendo invoked their nuclear weapon, the giant red button on their desk. The arbitration clause. Remember that quiet EULA update from earlier in the year, the one that no one noticed? Well, this was its debut performance. Nintendo argued that by using the Switch, Diaz and everyone else had agreed to individual arbitration. No courtroom or jury, and more crucially, no right to class action. And because it's right there in the contract, the judge agreed. The contract everyone signed when they powered up their Switch for the first time prohibited them from any action. The non-negotiable mandatory contract for using the device. And just like that, the class action was buried. Behind closed doors, individual arbitrations took place, far from public view. Nintendo didn't have to defend itself in front of a jury or release internal emails and engineering reports. By May of 2024, Diaz's team voluntarily dismissed the case. Even if Diaz won in arbitration, that was one individual case. It created no obligation for Nintendo to fix the controller of the millions of other users experiencing the same defect. And that might be one of the biggest issues with this now common order of events. When a corporation can hide behind arbitration, they aren't responsible for fixing their product. When the Switch 2 launched, many were stunned to discover that the widely suggested fix for stick drift using Hall effect joysticks that are immune to the defect weren't implemented in the Joy-Con 2. Maybe Nintendo managed to fix the problem without using Hall effect sticks, only time will tell. But the fact of the matter is that they don't have to. As long as the sticks last beyond the manufacturer's warranty, the best users can hope for is to engage Nintendo in a costly, lengthy, individual legal battle, or pony up another $90 for a replacement set. Forced arbitration and adhesion contracts aren't just limited to the entertainment brands. They are rampant in almost every aspect of life, from banking to rideshare services to dating apps and even employment. In 2020, the same year everything in the whole world caught on fire and exploded, forced arbitration ramped up. According to the American Association for Justice, both consumer and employee arbitration spiked during the pandemic. More claims were filed, but fewer people won. Just 577 consumers across the entire United States won a monetary award in arbitration in 2020. That is a 4.1% win rate, lower than the 5-year average of 5.3%. College applicants have a better shot at getting into MIT or Yale than winning an arbitration case. And for employees, it gets worse. Roughly 60 million workers are subject to arbitration clauses in their employment contracts. And in 2020, only 82 of them won any money at all. And I'll save you the time in reaching for a calculator. That is 0.0001%. Don't worry, if your company tries to kill you or almost kills you or once again kills your wife, you can't do anything about it. So what's to worry? Here's a fun thing I bet you didn't know. 1 in 3 employment arbitration cases filed in 2020 were against, and I'm not kidding, Family Dollar or parent company Dollar Tree. Think about the size of the entire United States workforce, and then think that a third of all of those complaints are against a single dollar store conglomerate. Something else that's interesting is some companies have made their arbitration clauses so airtight that they trap themselves. Postmates, the food delivery service, insisted that its couriers were independent contractors, not employees, to avoid paying them benefits. But more than 10,000 of those contractors decided to take advantage of the arbitration clause Postmates had forced on them. This backfired spectacularly, as Postmates was now on the hook for millions in fees to process all those individual arbitration claims. And the same thing happened with DoorDash in late 2019, when over 5,000 couriers filed arbitration claims. DoorDash attempted to flip the table by going to court to request a class action instead. Which I didn't even know companies could file class actions. That's terrifying. It's also ironic because the whole point of the arbitration thing is to keep the employees from doing a class action, so now you're doing a class action against them. The judge DoorDash went to, Judge William Alsup, wasn't having it. In a scathing ruling, William said, quote, "Faced with having to actually honor its side of the bargain, DoorDash now blanches at the cost of the filing fees it agreed to pay. This hypocrisy will not be blessed." And then there's Amazon, and I'm happy to tell you that all of their contract stuff is very nice to their employees, and everything is great, and there's no reason to talk about it. You've probably never read Amazon's condition of use agreement, the one you automatically accept when you use Alexa, shop on Prime, or even just browse their site. But buried in that agreement was a forced arbitration clause as well. Big surprise. Then came the lawsuits, 75,000 of them. Each one claiming Alexa devices had illegally recorded conversations without consent. For Amazon to start an arbitration case, it cost about $2,900 per claim. Multiply that by 75,000, and suddenly Amazon was staring down over $200 million in arbitration fees. And that's before any judgments or settlements. Which also, going back to the idea of having an arbiter or middleman negotiate these deals, when $200 million are on the line, how can they be impartial? Amazon almost immediately dropped the arbitration clause. Turns out corporations love arbitration until they're the ones forced to use it. So where do we stand in all this? Honestly, the goalposts keep moving, and there's little change that you can do to keep up because you decided to watch the live action Snow White, so you kind of deserve it. Or do something like play Animal Crossing. With that, you signed away your rights. EULAs are living, breathing organisms that feed on the soul of consumers like you and me. Next time you blindly click accept, maybe read the full terms and conditions to understand what it is you're getting yourself into, then decide for yourself if it's really worth it. Just kidding. I mean, what are you going to do? Not use an iPhone or an Android or listen to music or play Call of Duty? No, there's only like one bit of advice I can give you that actually works. Click and pray. And the other piece of advice I can give you is that it's not really advice. I hope you enjoyed the video, and we just want to say thank you for watching. I'm glad I could finally get some violence against Disney and Nintendo out. It feels good. It feels good for the soul. I feel lighter. Thank you all for the support you've continued to show the channel. Again, everyone who is involved in the production of this video will be mentioned in the description. Be sure to show them some love. New content on the way. Be sure to check us out over at Wendigoon and Creepcast. And I believe that should do it for now, but we just want to say thank you for watching. We hope that you enjoyed, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye! Can I get like a EULA as a YouTuber? Can there be something like when you hit the subscribe button, you have to like, I don't know, be nice to me?